Karen Lawson's coffee mug shattered against her kitchen floor as she stared at the letter in her trembling hands. $50,000. The HOA was fining her $50,000 for painting her mailbox cobalt blue instead of the approved midnight navy. The distinction was barely perceivable to the human eye, but apparently catastrophic to property values in Whispering Pines Estates, according to Deborah Reynolds, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of suburban aesthetics. "This is insane," Karen whispered, ignoring the coffee pooling around her slippers. After losing her husband 2 years ago, the last thing she needed was this ridiculous battle. But the number glaring back at her from the official letterhead wasn't a typo. $50,000 for a mailbox, plus $500 daily until she repainted it. Karen had purchased the historic farmhouse on the edge of the development specifically because it sat on 2 acres with a private access road. The previous owners had negotiated limited HOA oversight during development, but Deborah had spent the past year systematically reinterpreting bylaws to expand her power. "Mrs. Lawson?" A young voice called through the screen door. "You okay in there?" Zach, her 16-year-old neighbor, stood awkwardly on her porch, skateboard under his arm. He'd been helping with yard work since her husband died. "The HOA has finally lost their minds," Karen said, waving him in and showing him the letter. Zach whistled. "That's more than my college fund. For a mailbox? That's straight up evil." "Evil is accurate," Karen said, pacing her kitchen. "And now I have to decide, pay a ridiculous fine or fight an unwinnable battle. What does your lawyer say?" Karen laughed bitterly. "That I'd spend more fighting than paying." Karen spent the afternoon reviewing the HOA documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, sticky notes marking crucial pages. By evening, she found something interesting, very interesting. The private road running across her property that connected the eastern side of the neighborhood to the main boulevard was technically outside HOA jurisdiction. When her phone rang at 8 p.m., she expected Zach checking in. Instead, it was Deborah. "Karen, I notice you haven't scheduled the mailbox for painting yet. The committee wanted to make sure you understood the seriousness of the violation." Karen's response was measured. "Deborah, I understand perfectly. In fact, I've been reading our neighborhood documents all afternoon." "Well, that's good. Did you know my property deed gives me exclusive ownership of Orchard Lane, the private road cutting through my property?" Silence on the line. "The road the eastern residents use to avoid driving an extra 3 miles around to the main entrance. The road your daughter takes to high school every morning? That's a neighborhood easement," Deborah said, her voice suddenly tight. "Actually, it's not. My deed is quite clear. It's a private road with permitted access, which I can revoke." Karen smiled for the first time that day. "I check your documents before that fine becomes official." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm simply ensuring we all understand our property rights." Karen hung up, her heart racing. At the kitchen table, she pulled out a notepad and began sketching a tollbooth design. If they wanted to play hardball over a mailbox, they had no idea what Karen Lawson was capable of. The next morning, Karen made 2 appointments, one with a surveyor and one with a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes. The mailbox remained defiantly blue. Attorney Michelle Park's office smelled of leather and lemon polish. Her handshake was firm, her expression skeptical as she reviewed Karen's documents. "The HOA fine is obviously excessive," Michelle said, "but retaliatory actions could escalate this unnecessarily." "I'm not being retaliatory," Karen insisted, pushing her husband's original property survey across the desk. "I'm exercising my property rights while they're trampling all over theirs." Michelle's eyebrows rose as she examined the survey. "This is interesting. Your husband was thorough in preserving his rights to this access road." She flipped through more pages. "And this addendum explicitly states the road remains private property with revocable access permissions." Karen felt a surge of gratitude toward David. Even in death, he was protecting her. "So I can legally restrict access?" "Technically, yes, but practically speaking, creating a private toll road will ignite a neighborhood war." Karen thought about Deborah's smug face at the last HOA meeting when she'd announced new restrictions on holiday decorations. Maybe it's time for a little neighborhood revolution. By afternoon, surveyor Tim Rodriguez was placing stakes along Orchard Lane, marking the exact boundaries of Karen's property. Neighbors slowed their cars, watching with growing concern. Karen brought him iced tea and enjoyed their confusion. "Found something interesting," Tim said, pointing to his equipment. "The eastern edge of your property actually extends 12 feet further than this current fence line. The HOA has installed landscaping on your land without permission." Karen nodded, making notes. "Could you include detailed photos in your report?" "Absolutely. And Mrs. Lawson, between us, I've surveyed 6 properties in this development. The HOA has encroached on every single one." That evening, Karen's doorbell rang incessantly. She opened it to find Deborah flanked by 2 HOA board members. "What are you doing?" Deborah demanded. Residents are concerned about the survey stakes. I'm documenting my property boundaries before making improvements, Karen replied calmly. The board might be interested to know that HOA has installed irrigation and landscaping on my private property without compensation or permission. One board member, Walter Jensen, looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss the mailbox situation more reasonably. The time for reasonable discussion ended with a $50,000 fine, Karen said. Now, unless you're here to resign it completely, I have plans to finalize. After they left, Karen called Zach. How would you like a part-time job? I need someone tech-savvy to help me research toll booth operations. For real? That would be awesome. My dad says you're his new hero, by the way. Karen smiled. Tell your father I'm just getting started. That night, she drafted notices to all Eastern residents informing them that beginning in 2 weeks, Orchard Lane would become a private access road requiring either an annual pass or per-use fee. As she worked, she realized she was enjoying herself for the first time since David died. Sometimes, the right battle was exactly what a person needed. The construction crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp on a Monday, much to the horror of the morning commuters. Karen stood in her driveway, clipboard in hand, as orange cones blocked Orchard Lane and workers began unloading lumber and equipment. You can't do this, shouted Marcus Phillips, an investment banker who lived in the eastern section. I'll be late for my meeting. There's always the main entrance, Karen replied pleasantly, though I hear it adds 20 minutes with morning traffic. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered. Karen had anticipated this and set up a folding table with coffee, donuts, and printed copies of her property deed, the surveyor's report, and Section 12.3 of the neighborhood bylaws confirming her right to manage access to her private road. Deborah arrived just before noon, marching across Karen's lawn in designer heels that sank slightly into the soft ground. This is outrageous, she hissed, waving toward the half-constructed wooden booth that now stood at the entrance to Orchard Lane. The board will sue you for obstructing neighborhood access. The board should be careful about pursuing frivolous lawsuits, Karen replied, handing her a copy of the attorney's letter. Especially given the multiple documented instances of HOA encroachment on private property lines throughout the development. Walter Jensen approached, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Deborah, we should talk privately. Mrs. Lawson may have a point about jurisdiction. Deborah's face flushed crimson. You're all being manipulated. This is about a simple mailbox violation that spiraled because someone refuses to comply with standards we all agreed to. A violation with a $50,000 fine, Karen corrected, which coincidentally is exactly what I'm investing in this toll booth and security system. As Deborah stormed off, Karen noticed several neighbors lingering, examining the documents on her table. Zach's father, Brian, approached, coffee in hand. The HOA rejected my shed plans 3 times last year, he said quietly. What exactly are you planning with this toll booth? Annual passes for residents at $250 per year with options for monthly payments, Karen explained. Daily passes for non-residents at $5 per use. All proceeds beyond maintenance will be donated to the county's education foundation. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. And HOA board members? Karen smiled. Special pricing structure. They pay double. By evening, the basic structure was complete. A charming wooden booth with a crossing arm, security cameras, and a digital payment system Zach was helping install. Karen had specifically designed it to complement the neighborhood aesthetic, painted in approved Whispering Pines beige with tasteful green trim. That night, her phone rang continuously, some calls supportive, others threatening legal action. She let everything go to voicemail while she sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies and feeling a strange sense of peace. David would have loved this, she thought. He'd always taught her to stand up for herself, but she'd forgotten how during the fog of grief. As she sipped her tea, she noticed a figure approaching through the twilight. It was Walter Jensen, alone and looking nervous. Mrs. Lawson, he said, I think we need to talk about a compromise before this situation deteriorates further. I'm listening, Karen said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Some of us on the board feel Deborah has been overzealous in her interpretation of the bylaws. Karen laughed softly. That's one word for it. The crickets chirped as Walter chose his next words carefully. If the mailbox fine were to be rescinded entirely, would you consider an alternative to the toll booth? The fine is just a symptom, Walter. The disease is much deeper. By Wednesday morning, Karen's toll booth was operational. Zach had programmed an impressive system that included license plate recognition, digital payment options, and automated receipts. Karen sat inside during the morning rush wearing a crisp white shirt and a name tag that read Toll Operations Manager. The first car approached just after 7 a.m. Deborah's silver Mercedes. She rolled down her window, face tight with fury. This is your last chance to dismantle this monstrosity, she said. Karen smiled pleasantly. The toll is $10 for HOA board members. Cash or card? I will not pay to use a neighborhood road. Then you'll need to use the main entrance. You're holding up the line, Ms. Reynolds. The honking behind her grew insistent. Finally, Deborah slapped a $10 bill onto the counter and snatched the day pass Karen offered. This isn't over, she warned. You're absolutely right about that, Karen agreed. By mid-morning, Karen had collected over $300 in tolls, with most residents grudgingly paying while expressing varying levels of support or frustration. She programmed discounts for carpools, seniors, and anyone who brought her coffee. At lunchtime, 3 police cruisers pulled up. Officer Rodriguez, coincidentally, the surveyor's brother, approached the booth. Mrs. Lawson, we've received complaints about illegal road obstruction. Karen handed him her folder of legal documentation. I've been expecting you. My attorney advised this might happen. The officer reviewed the papers, occasionally raising his eyebrows. Finally, he returned them. Appears you're within your rights on private property, though I should warn you the HOA president was quite insistent we shut this down. I imagine she was, Karen said. Would you like a complimentary day pass? First responders travel free. After the police left, Karen noticed a new problem. Cars were cutting through her side lawn to avoid the toll booth, creating muddy tracks across her grass. She immediately called a landscaping company, which arrived within hours to install decorative boulders along the property line. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Karen arrived early, choosing a seat in the front row. The room buzzed with tension as residents filed in, many nodding to Karen or giving her subtle thumbs up. Deborah called the meeting to order, her voice strained. We're here to address Mrs. Lawson's destructive and hostile actions that are impeding neighborhood access and decreasing property values. Karen raised her hand. Point of order. Have property values been professionally assessed since the toll booth installation 2 days ago? That's not. Because my research suggests properly managed private roads with controlled access can actually increase adjacent property values by up to 12%. Murmurs spread throughout the room. Karen had touched on the development's most sacred concern. Walter Jensen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should consider Karen's proposal. What proposal? Deborah demanded. Karen stood. I'm glad you asked. I prepared a presentation on HOA reform that addresses equitable fine structures, transparent governance, and proper boundary respect. She connected her laptop to the projector. Shall we begin with the 17 documented cases of HOA encroachment on private property lines? Or would you prefer to start with the inconsistent application of fines over the past 3 years? The color drained from Deborah's face as Karen's first slide appeared, showing a graph of fine increases that corresponded suspiciously with the dates Deborah had assumed HOA presidency. This isn't about your mailbox anymore, is it? Deborah whispered. Karen smiled. It never was. By Friday, the toll booth had become a neighborhood landmark. Karen had recruited several retired residents to take shifts, creating a rotation schedule that covered peak hours. To her surprise, many Eastern residents had begun stopping to chat, sharing their own HOA grievances while paying their toll. Martha Simmons, an 82-year-old widow who'd lived in the development since its inception, brought Karen homemade cookies during the afternoon shift. I waited 15 years to see someone stand up to these petty tyrants, she said, adjusting her enormous sunglasses. They cited me for wind chimes last month. Wind chimes that my late husband made for our 50th anniversary. Karen added Martha to the seniors travel free list she created. Have you considered attending the next board meeting? We could use your historical perspective. By evening, Karen had compiled a comprehensive list of resident complaints, organized by category and severity. She was reviewing these notes when a black SUV pulled up to the booth. The window rolled down to reveal Councilman James Harris, whose district included Whispering Pines. Mrs. Lawson, I've been hearing some interesting stories about your neighborhood revolution. Karen smiled cautiously. Just exercising my property rights, Councilman, and collecting quite a bit in tolls from what I understand. All being donated to the Education Foundation, minus maintenance costs. I'd be happy to show you the books. The councilman studied her for a moment. The thing is, Mrs. Lawson, HOAs wield significant influence in local elections. They organize voting blocks, make endorsements, hold fundraisers. Are you asking me to dismantle my toll booth? Actually, I'm wondering if you've considered running for HOA president yourself. Reform is often more effective from within. Karen hadn't expected this. Deborah has been president for 3 years running. No one runs against her. Perhaps because no one had demonstrated the courage to challenge her until now. He handed her a business card. My office has been receiving calls about overzealous HOAs throughout the district. If you're interested in discussing broader reform initiatives, I'd be happy to meet. After he left, Karen called a strategy meeting with her growing circle of supporters. They gathered on her back patio, an unlikely coalition of young families, retirees, and everyone who ever received an unreasonable HOA fine. We need to be strategic, Karen explained. The annual HOA election is in 6 weeks. If we want meaningful change, we need candidates for all 5 board positions. Martha raised her hand. I'll run for treasurer. I was an accountant for 40 years before retiring. Zach's father, Brian, volunteered for the architectural committee position. 2 others stepped forward for remaining roles. What about you, Karen? Martha asked. You have a natural choice for president. Karen hesitated. I'm not sure that's the right move. My toll booth gives me leverage outside the system. But imagine what you could do with legitimate authority, Brian argued. You could rewrite the entire fine structure. As they debated strategy, Karen's phone rang. It was Walter Jensen. Karen, we have a problem. Deborah's hired an attorney to file an injunction against your toll booth. They're submitting paperwork tomorrow morning. On what grounds? Emergency access obstruction. They're claiming your toll booth could delay emergency vehicles. Karen thought quickly. Even though I give an automatic free access to all emergency services, they're suggesting the physical structure creates a hazard regardless of your policies. Thanks for the heads up, Walter. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause. Because I've seen the HOA financial records. You're not the first person Deborah has targeted with excessive fines, but you might be the first who can actually stop her. After hanging up, Karen addressed her supporters. It seems we have less time than we thought. Tomorrow, we escalate. Karen spent Saturday morning meeting with her attorney and reviewing options for countering the injunction. By noon, they had developed a multi-pronged strategy, and it was far more aggressive than the toll booth. Filing a class action lawsuit is a significant escalation, Michelle warned. Once we submit these documents, there's no turning back. Karen studied the paperwork before her, a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA for selective enforcement, procedural violations, and financial mismanagement, with 15 neighborhood co-plaintiffs already signed on. Submit it Monday morning, Karen decided, and request an emergency hearing on the toll booth injunction. While Karen was meeting with her lawyer, Zach and his friends were implementing phase 2 of her plan. Using the surveyor's report, they placed bright orange property markers along every documented HOA encroachment in the neighborhood. Flower beds that extended onto private property, irrigation systems installed without permission, and decorative features that crossed boundary lines. By mid-afternoon, Whispering Pines resembled an archaeological dig site, with over 70 markers creating a visual representation of HOA overreach. Residents walked the neighborhood, taking photos and comparing notes about the orange flags dotting their lawns. When Deborah came roaring up to the toll booth in her Mercedes, Karen was ready. What is the meaning of those survey flags? She demanded. Just documenting existing conditions before our court date, Karen explained calmly. Did you know the HOA has installed approximately $87,000 worth of landscaping on private property throughout the development, without permission or compensation? Deborah's expression faltered. The community beautification projects were approved by the board. Approving projects on land you don't own is a fascinating interpretation of authority. Karen handed her a formal letter. This is notice of a class action lawsuit being filed Monday morning by 16 homeowners seeking damages for property encroachment, punitive fines, and financial mismanagement. Deborah's hands trembled as she read. This is absurd. You can't possibly think you'll win. Actually, my attorney is quite confident, especially after reviewing the HOA financial records Walter provided. Walter, Deborah went pale. He wouldn't dare. When people discover they've been complicit in wrongdoing, they often develop a conscience. Karen leaned forward. By the way, the toll booth stays open until the hearing. That'll be $10. After Deborah sped away without paying, Karen called Walter. She knows you shared the financial records, Karen told him. You should be prepared for retaliation. It's already happening, Walter said, his voice tight. She's called an emergency board meeting for tonight to remove me from the board, but she doesn't realize how many people are now paying attention. That evening, the clubhouse was packed for the emergency meeting, with residents spilling out the doors. Karen arrived to find Deborah attempting to start proceedings. This is a closed board meeting, Deborah announced. Only board members may attend. Section 4.7 of the bylaws states all disciplinary proceedings against board members must be open to the community, Martha called out, waving a highlighted copy of the regulations. The crowd murmured in agreement, smartphones raised to record. Karen took a seat beside Walter as Deborah struggled to maintain control of the meeting. For 3 hours, residents lined up to speak, sharing stories of excessive fines, selective enforcement, and petty regulations. As the meeting finally adjourned near midnight, Deborah caught Karen at the door. You've turned my neighborhood against me, she hissed. No, Deborah. You did that all by yourself. Karen handed her a toll invoice for the day's crossing. You still owe $10, by the way. Late fees begin Monday. Sunday morning brought unexpected sunshine after a week of clouds, which Karen took as a good omen. She was covering the early toll booth shift when Walter arrived on foot carrying a thick manila envelope. "I couldn't sleep last night," he said, sliding the envelope across the counter. "So I did some deeper digging into the HOA financials." Karen opened it to find bank statements, invoices, and a spreadsheet with highlighted transactions. "What am I looking at?" "Evidence of potential financial impropriety. For the past 2 years, the HOA has been paying a landscaping company called Sunbelt Design Group significantly above market rate for basic maintenance. Sunbelt is registered to Robert Reynolds." "Deborah's husband," Karen whispered, scanning the documents. "They've received over $200,000 from our HOA funds when comparable services should have cost half that. And here's where it gets interesting. The excess fines collected under Deborah's enhanced enforcement almost exactly match the premium paid to Sunbelt." Karen felt a chill despite the morning sun. She's been targeting homeowners with excessive fines to funnel money to her husband's company. "That's my suspicion. I've already called the councilman. This goes beyond HOA politics. It's potential fraud." Karen immediately called an emergency meeting of her supporters in her home. By noon, her living room was filled with concerned neighbors reviewing the evidence Walter had compiled. "This changes our strategy," Karen explained. "We're no longer just fighting unreasonable rules. We're exposing potential criminal activity." Martha adjusted her glasses, reviewing the financial statements. "As her former accountant, I can confirm these invoices show classic signs of padding. Double billing, vague service descriptions, excessive hourly rates." "What do we do?" Brian asked. "Go to the police?" "Not yet," Karen decided. "First, we need to secure the complete financial records before they can be altered, and we need to approach this carefully to protect Walter as our whistleblower." They developed a plan for the next day's court hearing on the toll booth injunction, a hearing that would now serve a much larger purpose than Karen had originally intended. That afternoon, Karen was surprised to find Deborah's daughter, Emma, at her front door, looking uncomfortable. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," she said nervously. "But I've been listening to her and Dad arguing all week about your toll booth and the lawsuit." Karen invited her in. "That sounds stressful." "Last night was the worst. Dad was yelling about how she promised no one would ever check the invoices, that the board just rubber-stamped whatever she submitted." Emma twisted her hands. "I think they're doing something illegal with the HOA money." "Why are you telling me this, Emma?" "Because they're talking about moving suddenly. Dad mentioned Costa Rica having no extradition." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm supposed to start college in the fall. I can't just disappear to another country." After Emma left, Karen immediately called her attorney and the councilman. This was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. That evening, Karen sat alone on her porch swing, contemplating how a simple blue mailbox had unraveled an entire community's power structure. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zach. "Toll booth surveillance shows Deborah and Robert loading suitcases into their car. Should we be worried?" Karen dialed the councilman. "I think we need those authorities involved sooner rather than later." "Already handled," he replied. "The county prosecutor has been briefed and they won't be leaving town tonight. Just focus on tomorrow's hearing." As dusk settled over Whispering Pines, Karen painted her mailbox. Not navy blue or cobalt blue, but a bright, defiant crimson. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important battles begin with the smallest acts of resistance. Monday morning's courthouse steps were crowded with Whispering Pines residents, reporters from the local newspaper, and a somber-looking Deborah flanked by her attorney. Karen arrived with Michelle, Walter, and their growing coalition of supporters. "Quite a turnout for a toll booth injunction," the judge commented as proceedings began. "Your Honor," Michelle addressed the court, "while we're here to address the injunction against my client's toll booth, we believe this case represents a much broader issue of HOA overreach and potential financial misconduct." For the next hour, evidence unfolded methodically. The excessive fine structure implemented under Deborah's leadership, the questionable landscaping contracts, the selective enforcement against targeted homeowners. Walter testified about the financial discrepancies, his voice steady despite Deborah's glare. During a brief recess, the county prosecutor approached Karen in the hallway. "We're opening a formal investigation based on the financial records provided," she explained quietly. The Reynolds had been placed under travel restriction pending that investigation. When court resumed, the judge denied the injunction against Karen's toll booth with a wry smile. "Private property rights are fundamental," he noted. "Perhaps next time the HOA should consult a surveyor before installing landscaping or issuing fines." Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Karen. "Mrs. Lawson, do you plan to keep your toll booth operational?" Karen considered the question carefully. The toll booth served its purpose to highlight the importance of respecting property boundaries and fair governance. "Moving forward, I'm more interested in HOA reform than collecting tolls." By that evening, news had spread throughout Whispering Pines. The HOA board, minus Deborah and Walter, issued a statement announcing an emergency election to replace all board positions scheduled for the following week. Karen's phone rang constantly. Residents volunteering for her reform slate, neighbors sharing stories of their own HOA battles, even calls from nearby communities facing similar issues. Just after sunset, Karen was surprised to find Deborah standing on her doorstep, looking exhausted. "Have you come to apologize for the mailbox fine?" Karen asked. "I've come to tell you that you've destroyed everything I've worked for," Deborah replied. "My reputation, my standing in this community. Was it worth it?" Karen studied her. "Was it worth targeting your neighbors with excessive fines to funnel money to your husband's company?" Deborah flinched. "The community benefited from our management. Everything was running smoothly until you decided to make it personal." It became personal when you tried to extort $50,000 from a widow over a mailbox color. Karen's voice remained steady. "The difference between us, Deborah, is that I never wanted power over my neighbors. I just wanted to be left alone." After Deborah left, Karen sat on her porch swing, watching the fireflies emerge in the twilight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zach. "Toll booth earnings total, $4,327. Education Foundation is thrilled with the donation. P.S. My dad's campaign for architectural committee is picking up steam." Karen smiled. 1 week until the election, which her reform slate was virtually guaranteed to win. Beyond that, the county investigation into the HOA finances promised more revelations. Her simple act of defiance had triggered a neighborhood revolution that no one had seen coming. As darkness settled over Whispering Pines, Karen considered what changes she would implement as the likely incoming HOA president. A fair fine structure, transparent financials, reasonable aesthetic guidelines. But most importantly, a community that respected individual rights while still maintaining standards. She glanced at her crimson mailbox gleaming under the porch light. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance created the most significant changes. The toll booth would come down tomorrow. She'd made her point. But her bright red mailbox would remain as a reminder that standing your ground sometimes meant standing alone until others found their courage. As for what would happen after the election, after the financial investigation concluded, after the community attempted to heal its divisions, well, that was a story for another day. For now, Karen was content knowing that sometimes justice came in unexpected forms, like a toll booth on a private road and a mailbox that refused to be navy blue.